Some people believe this entity is a vampire. Others think it's a ghost or simply just a myth. What do you believe? These are the ghost stories from our own backyard, so sit down, dim the lights as I tell you the story of the vampire of Toowong Cemetery. Toowong Cemetery is located in Brisbane, Queensland, and it officially opened in 1875. However, burials date back to 1871, with the most notable burial being Queensland's second governor, Colonel Samuel Blackall. Since then, many high-profile Brisbane figures from the late 19th century and the early 20th century have been buried there. Over the years, many ghost stories and urban legends have emerged from Toowong Cemetery and been passed down through generations, including the legend of Spooks Hill and sightings of an apparition who is said to be Queensland's famous boxer, Peter Jackson. However, today we'll be talking about the famous Toowong Cemetery vampire. Within the cemetery, there's a stretch of road lined with headstones, and it's called the 12th Avenue. And it is rumoured that a beautiful 19th century vampire is said to lurk in the shadows. And some people refer to this creature as Lily. Rumour has it that 2 gravediggers were sent to the cemetery to dig up the body of a woman who had been buried for 20 years. And their job was to confirm what this woman actually died of. And when they reached the grave, they noticed that the ground looked soft and recently disturbed. And once they dug up the coffin, they were in shock. The coffin nails had been pushed from the inside outwards, as if something was trying to escape, or did escape. They opened the lid to discover a beautiful woman inside who had not decomposed even though they had been buried for 20 years. One of the gravediggers decided to test their bravery. They reached into the coffin to touch the face of the corpse. It is said that her head rolled to the side and smiled up at the men, revealing a row of sharp teeth. And as she smiled, a red, thick liquid leaked from her mouth. The gravediggers quickly shut the lid, buried the coffin, never to return again. Although the vampires we are familiar with don't usually come out during the day, but at Toowong Cemetery, reports of a mysterious dark figure has been spotted along the 12th Avenue. One story claims that around midday, a group of visitors were at the cemetery and claimed to have passed a woman wearing dark clothing. This mysterious woman smiled at the visitors, revealing her sharp teeth. They quickly ran back to their car to leave the cemetery after becoming so spooked. And as they approached the exit, they were met by the same woman, standing in front of the gates, blocking their way out. There was no way a normal human would beat them to the gate, and after a short time, the mysterious woman stepped to the side, allowing them to leave. What do you think this mysterious entity really is? Do you know about the first woman to be executed at the old Melbourne jail? These are the ghost stories from our own backyard. So sit down, dim the lights, as I tell you the story of the ghost of Elizabeth Scott. Elizabeth Scott's story is a sad and tragic one. Elizabeth was only 13 years old when she was forced to marry a 35-year-old and violent man called Robert Scott. And for 10 years, the Scotts ran a pub near Mansfield in Victoria. And in that time, Elizabeth had 5 children, in which only 2 survived past infancy. Elizabeth would often work behind the bar and befriend the young men that came in, including a 19-year-old man called David Gedge, and people speculated that Elizabeth was having an affair with him. She also met another young man called Julian Cross. Elizabeth's husband Robert was also an alcoholic, and on one night in April 1863, he became extremely intoxicated. David and Julian came up with a plan to murder Robert. One of the men shot Robert in the head and he died instantly, and the 2 men tried to make it look like Robert took his own life. However, not only was David and Julian arrested for the murder of Robert Scott, but Elizabeth was too, even though she wasn't in the room when Robert died. But Elizabeth was accused of being the mastermind behind the whole plan. However, the next morning after the murder, Julian made a confession. This confession implicated David and Elizabeth, and the jury only took half an hour to find Elizabeth Scott guilty. And during the trial, Sir William Starwell, also known as the hanging judge, condemned all 3 to hanging. And on the 11th of November 1863, right before the trapdoors opened beneath Elizabeth, she muttered her last words to David, who was on the gallows beside her. "David, will you not clear me now?" And as she said this, the trapdoors opened, and she never heard David's reply. And ever since that day, Elizabeth Scott's spirit is said to still reside at the old Melbourne jail. A female apparition has been seen, and a disembodied female voice has been heard around the gallows. And many people believe that it's Elizabeth, still pleading her innocence from beyond the veil. You may recognise this building in Melbourne, but did you know it is haunted by the ghost of a fisherman? These are the ghost stories from our own backyard, So sit down, dim the lights as I tell you the story of the Flinders Street Station ghost. Flinders Street Station was the first train station built in any Australian city. It was built in 1854 and was originally called Melbourne Terminus. And at the time, it was built out of weatherboard sheds. In the 1900s, there was a demand for an upgrade on the station, and construction went underway. It took 10 years to build, and it's the design we see today. However, over the years, there has been many reports by staff and travellers of a ghostly sighting on Platform 10. This spirit has been seen so often that the staff have given it the nickname George. He has been described as looking disorientated while clutching at his fishing gear, looking out towards the Yarra River. One alleged witness says, "He appears to be lost, he seems out of place," and eventually he will wander down the stairs and disappear. There is a theory that George may have drowned in the Yarra River, but who he is exactly and why he remains at the station is a mystery. Some people believe he has been around since Melbourne's settlement, whereas others believe he is the spirit of Ernest Leahy, who died in a boating accident on the Yarra River in 1902. Perhaps he caught the train to go fishing at the river, and is now waiting for the train to take him home. The existence of the paranormal has captivated our world for many years. These are the stories from our own backyard. So sit down, dim the lights as I tell you the story of the Headless Horseman of Black Swamp. Charlie Lee, who drove the Deniliquin and Hay coach for many years, had claimed to see the Headless Horseman in action. He just kept circling, getting closer and closer until the light of the campfire revealed a reddish-brown horse. His clothes were covered by a dusty cape and, well, there was nothing above his collar. In the early 1850s, a man named Doyle was said to have died near what was then known as Black Swamp. It was said that his spirit would appear on top of a horse, circling Black Swamp in the night. Many people avoided camping there, as they thought that the sight of this spirit indicated that death was on their doorstep. Many people have claimed to have seen Doyle's ghost, while others say it was an act of fraud. A butcher in the area would dress up and pretend to be the ghost so that he could scare away the people, steal their cattle, and then sell the meat. However, believers in this tale have pointed out that the earliest known sightings of the Headless Horseman date back by a decade or more before the butcher's antics. Was it really an act of fraud, or did this spirit exist? Perhaps if you camp in that area, maybe, just maybe, you may come across the spirit of the Headless Horseman of Black Swamp. A group of local fishermen thought that they would try their luck out at sea, until a large boat they recognised came into view. It was the SS Yongala, steaming steadily 12 years after her sinking. These are the ghost stories from our own backyard. So sit down, dim the lights as I tell you about Australia's phantom ship. In March 1911, the SS Yongala departed Brisbane and was heading towards Townsville. Soon after its departure, the Yongala sank in a powerful storm. 122 lives were lost in this disaster. Despite efforts to locate the ship, its final resting place remained a mystery for almost half a century. Parts of the wreckage washed ashore south of Townsville, but the ship was not located until 1958. And oddly, not a single body was ever found. After the Yongala's disappearance, sightings of a ghost ship started to emerge. The fishermen who had claimed to seen this phantom ship described it as being encrusted in millions of barnacles, with no crew or passengers on board except for wisps of smoke coming out of the ship's broken funnel. As they observed the phantom ship, it disappeared behind an island, and to their surprise it did not come out the other side. The fishermen hastily sailed around the island to discover there was no ship in sight. It was as if the ship had disappeared into thin air. Whether this phantom ship is real, or it's just a fisherman's tale, you can actually go and visit the wreckage. It is described as being one of the best shipwrecks in the world, and is now home to many sea creatures. Did you know that famous paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren once visited Australia to investigate a house? These are the ghost stories from our own backyard. So sit down, dim the lights as I tell you about Australia's version of the famous Amityville Horror House. In 1980, Ed and Lorraine Warren flew to Australia to be guests on the Don Lane show on Channel 9. Viewers were encouraged to ring the Melbourne studio about their paranormal experiences. But there was one phone call that spiked their interest. A young couple called in and told them about the house they moved into 3 years ago, and ever since they had been tormented by terrifying events. The father began to have murderous thoughts. There was laughter echoing throughout the house that was not theirs, and symbols and faces were appearing around the house. The Warrens agreed to visit the house and reported that they felt depressed when entering the property. In a quiet room, Lorraine Warren sat on the bed to feel the atmosphere. One of the film crew was astonished to see Lorraine transform in front of his eyes. Her face began to look much more elderly, as if she was turning into another person. The film crew also experienced a large amount of technical difficulties while on the property. The Warrens came to a conclusion that one of the previous owners of the house put a curse on it, and the family was at risk of demonic possession and should leave immediately. The Sun newspaper reported the story on the front page titled "Family Flee Ghost House." The Warrens told the newspaper that the house was full of negative feelings and witchcraft. There was no love or God in the house, and if they stay in the house any longer, there was going to be a psychic explosion. The family fled the house and moved to a different suburb, leaving all their possessions behind, and the Warrens flew back to America. There was no updates on the family or the house after that. Some say if the Warrens did not intervene, this may have been Australia's version of the famous Amityville house. The Princess Theatre in Melbourne has its own resident ghost that has been alarming patrons, actors and workers for over 100 years. These are the ghost stories from our own backyard. So sit down, dim the lights as I tell you about Federici, the famous Princess Theatre ghost. In 1888, Frederick Baker, otherwise known by his stage name Federici, was performing in a new play called The Faust. The play ends with Federici descending into hell through a trapdoor. As Federici went through the trapdoor, the audience reported to have noticed that he was slightly slumped over. He had actually suffered a heart attack and died at that exact moment. Despite efforts to restart his heart, he could not be saved. The audience did not know about his death until the end of the play, when it was revealed after the actor's bow. However, the audience and his fellow actors said that was impossible, as they had seen him bowing on stage with the rest of them. Unlike most ghost stories, sightings of Federici's ghosts started to emerge immediately after death. A new fire alarm system was put into the theatre 10 years after Federici's death. One night, the local fireman who was looking after the alarm system forgot to set it for the night, and an alert was sent to the nearby fire station. The brigade came quickly and discovered that there was no sight of a fire or their fellow colleague. They eventually found him huddled in a corner. He explained that he had been spooked by a see-through man on stage in evening clothes, a top hat and glowing eyes. And it's a long-standing tradition to save a seat for Federici's ghost on the opening night of a new production. He is usually spotted in the dress circle in the second or third row. So if you ever visit the Princess Theatre in Melbourne, stay alert because you may come across the ghost of Frederick Baker. Australia has many spooky roads that have been scaring drivers out of their seatbelts. These are the ghost stories from our own backyard. So sit down, dim the lights as I tell you about the Lady in Black. In the Blue Mountains, west of Sydney, is a road that snakes around the bushland, known as Victoria Pass. Victoria Pass was built by convicts, and many deaths occurred here. There is no doubt that this road has a dark past, and it has formed its own urban legend called the Lady in Black. The Lady in Black is said to appear to travellers at night. She has been described as having long black hair, a pale face, and is often seen wearing a black dress. Some say she even has eyes that glow in the dark. But who is this girl and what is her story? Caroline James was born in 1827 to a big but poor family. Her parents were convicts and ran an illegal alcohol business. After her mother's death, the family fell into hard times. Caroline was then sent to work for a wealthy family and caught the eye of a man called William Collins. Caroline was only 13 when they married in 1840. But their marriage was unhappy and William suffered with substance abuse. Caroline soon left him and went to live with her sister. Caroline's sister was married to a man called John Walsh, who was an ex-convict convicted of murder. This is where the story takes a dark turn. The next part is very sad, so viewer discretion is advised. One night, Caroline was seen drinking in the local tavern with William and John. A violent brawl broke out between the two men, and Caroline tried to defend William. The next morning, around 6 a.m, the local postman came across the body of a young woman on Victoria Pass. It was Caroline, and she had suffered a severe blow to the head. She was almost unrecognisable, and a bloodied rock was found beside her. John Walsh was convicted of her murder in 1842. Caroline was only 15 when she passed. Ever since then, people have said her spirit walks along the pass for eternity. Over the years, the road has been upgraded and redone, and the stories of the Lady in Black became less and less as time went on. However, truck drivers have still claimed to see the Lady in Black on cold, frosty nights, appearing on the side of the road, black hair, white face, and a black dress blowing in the wind. This is quite possibly one of Australia's most famous ghost stories. These are the ghost stories from our own backyard. So sit down, dim the lights as I tell you about the legend of Fisher's ghost. In 1815, Frederick Fisher was sentenced to Australia for 14 years for obtaining forged banknotes. By 1822, Frederick had served half his sentence and was able to buy a farm in Campbelltown, New South Wales. He soon became friends with his neighbour William Worrell. In 1825, Frederick had gotten into an altercation with another man over money and was sentenced to prison for a short amount of time. During his sentence, Frederick made his neighbour William Worrell his power of attorney. Once Frederick had served his sentence, he was able to return back to town. In 1826, Frederick had completely disappeared and was not seen alive again, and William Worrell had announced that Frederick had left to go back to England. 3 weeks after Frederick's disappearance, William had sold Frederick's house along with all his belongings, claiming that Frederick had given him permission to do so. Now, people suspected that William was involved in the disappearance, but there was not enough proof. The town became suspicious, and William Worrell was arrested. However, William declared his innocence and claimed that 4 other men were involved. Those men were also arrested. One night, a respected man called John Farley stumbled into a pub in Campbelltown. John was in complete shock, claiming to have seen the ghost of Frederick Fisher. John said that he'd seen Frederick's ghost sitting on the railing of a bridge. Frederick's ghost let out a ghostly moan and pointed towards the direction of the creek, before fading away. 2 young boys also reported seeing bloodstains on a nearby fence. An Aboriginal man was called in to help the police track and find any evidence that may lead them to a body, and they soon found human fat in the creek that Frederick's ghost pointed to. Not long after, Frederick's remains were found in a shallow grave nearby. William Worrell was found guilty of the murder of Frederick Fisher and was sentenced to death by hanging in 1827. And on the night of his execution, William had confessed to the murder. Some say that the ghost of Frederick Fisher still haunts the town, specifically the town hall, where Frederick and William's land connected. Ever since Frederick's death, there has been many rumours and tales of what really happened. However, John Farley, who was the man that came face to face with the ghost of Frederick Fisher, still claimed on his deathbed that he had seen Fisher's ghost as clear as day. We've all heard stories about haunted houses, but have you ever heard about this haunted train station? These are the ghost stories from our own backyard. So sit down, dim the lights as I tell you about the story of the ghost of Macquarie Fields train station. After the last train leaves, there has been many reports of a young girl faintly crying on the tracks in a blood-splattered dress. They say her cries get louder and louder as the night goes on. Some people have said that sometimes she shrieks in terror at an unknown sight, while others say she just sits on the tracks and cries, sometimes staring up at them. People say that they know the story behind this apparition. July 11th, 1906, there was an article posted about a woman called Emily, who was reported to be hit and killed on the railway of Macquarie Fields. And this young girl was actually a 42-year-old woman. Before the incident, Emily had been in and out of asylums for her declining mental health, and she was in need of constant watching. On the day of her death, a nurse was sent with Emily to accompany her on the train. The nurse reported that Emily seemed quite normal on the train and nothing out of the ordinary. They both got off at Glenfield, and as the train was taking off again, Emily quickly hopped back on, leaving her nurse behind. Emily then got off the train at Macquarie Fields train station by herself. A train driver reported seeing Emily walk onto the tracks as the train approached. He could not slow down in time and hit Emily. The coroner reported that her death was not accidental. So if you're brave enough to see if this urban legend is true, you will need to wait until the last train is gone and the station is empty. And maybe, just maybe, you might hear a faint crying coming from the tracks. The ruins of Point King Lighthouse is said to be haunted by the ghost of a former lighthouse keeper who has helped boats into harbour during storms. These are the ghost stories from our own backyard. So sit down, dim the lights as I tell you about the lighthouse keeper that never left. In hopes of bringing more passenger liners and boats to the Port of Albany, a lighthouse needed to be constructed as distant islands and a narrow entrance made it hard for boats to come ashore. The Point King Lighthouse was built in 1858 and shone its light for the first time on the 1st of January. Lighthouse keepers were required to trim the lamp's wick daily. Over time, the lighthouse became neglected, and with the rise of technology, power was eventually installed. The building fell into disrepair and the light ceased to work. Although this building has fallen into disrepair, there has been many ghost stories that has kept this building alive. Stories tell of a ghostly bearded lighthouse keeper still on duty, wearing a dark coat, a black hat, and smoking a pipe. He is said to watch over the stretch of sea heading into Albany, and many people have seen him roaming the ruin and the surrounding land. He is also said to manifest on boats who run into trouble finding land, helping to guide them to safety. While it remains a mystery of who this ghostly apparition is, some people claim it to be John Redden, who was the last lightkeeper. What's left of this building today has become a hot spot for paranormal enthusiasts and photographers who seek to capture the beauty and mystery behind this location. Did you know that the Luna Park in Melbourne has its own resident Joker ghost? These are the ghost stories from our own backyard. So sit down, dim the lights as I tell you about the ghost of Luna Park. So you may already know about the ghost train tragedy that happened at Sydney's Luna Park. This accident happened in 1979 and killed 6 children and 1 adult. However, Melbourne's Luna Park is known for having its own ghost. The Luna Park in Melbourne was the first out of 4 parks created across Australia. It opened in 1912 and it only took a couple of decades before ghost stories started to circulate. Known as the Joker Ghost, this mischievous spirit has a bad habit of scaring people on roller coasters and appearing suddenly in Ferris wheel carts. The appearances of this ghost occurred in 1940, but suddenly disappeared as fast as they had come. Some of the witnesses actually accused Luna Park of being behind this stunt, but the park denied this and claimed that making a person appear and disappear was nearly impossible, especially on the Ferris wheel. Some people speculate on who this trickster spirit might be, but no one really knows for sure. Luna Park has seen quite a few accidents that have resulted in death since its opening, including a snake charmer that was bitten by his own tiger snake in 1913, as well as a man falling out of the roller coaster in 1935. The story behind this Joker spirit still remains a mystery. People still claim that it was just a publicity stunt by the park, while others say that this Joker spirit still lurks the park today. Located in New South Wales, the Wakehurst Parkway is associated with a mysterious female spirit that appears in the back seats of people's cars. These are the ghost stories from our own backyard. So sit down, dim the lights as I tell you about the urban legend of Wakehurst Parkway. And you guys have been requesting this one for a while now, so here we go. Not only is this road known for its eerie atmosphere, fatal crashes, and the dumping ground of murder victims, but it's also known for a spirit named Kelly, who has been terrifying travellers for many years. Those that have claimed to seen Kelly say that she appears on or beside the road late at night, but suddenly disappears as soon as motorists swerve to avoid her or to look back, only to see nothing there. She is also said to sometimes appear inside of people's cars. She has been described as looking like a nun or somebody wearing a white dress. Some people speculate that this spirit may have been a woman who died in a car crash on this long stretch of road, while other people think that she may actually be a nurse from the quarantine station at Manly nearby. People claim that she is simply just a lonely spirit looking for a way home, but others have reported that she's more of a negative entity that has the ability to steer you off the road and cause you to crash. What do you think? Shop owners, visitors, and security staff have experienced paranormal occurrences in this shopping arcade. These are the ghost stories from our own backyard, so sit down, dim the lights as I tell you about the grisly tales of Adelaide Arcade. On the 12th of December 1885, the Adelaide Arcade officially opened. In its long history of operation, the Adelaide Arcade has seen multiple fatal tragedies, including murder. In 1904, a man called Thomas Houghton shot his wife dead in what used to be the laneway next to the arcade. She ran into the arcade, hoping to get help before her last breath. However, Adelaide Arcade is most famous for the ghost of Francis Clooney, who used to be the caretaker. He unfortunately lost his life in a horrific accident 2 years after the arcade opened. On the night of his death, Francis Clooney was left in charge of the lights, while the man who was meant to be in charge was not working that night. The lights began to flicker and Francis went to see what the problem was. Soon after he went down to check, the lights completely went out. The reason the lights went out was because Francis had somehow fallen into the electrical generator and died in the most gruesome way. His mangled body was found a short time later. Some people believe that his death was accidental and that he simply just slipped, while other people think he may have been murdered by a group of teens he had gotten into an altercation with shortly before his death. Many of the arcade's businesses think that Francis Clooney's spirit is still walking among them and watches over them. Francis is known to welcome new people to the arcade with his presence. He is also known to knock things over in the shops, mess with the electrical items, and sometimes appear as a full-body apparition wearing a long coat. People say that Francis is just a friendly spirit who likes to watch over the arcade, as he would have in his caretaker job. There has also been reports of a ghost of a young child who has been said to appear and disappear into thin air. People say this could be the ghost of a young toddler who died in the arcade in 1902. Did you know that one of the top 10 most haunted dolls in the world lives in Australia? These are the ghost stories from our own backyard, so sit down, dim the lights as I tell you about the story of the Let Me Out doll. In 1972, Kerry Walton and his brother decided to explore an abandoned house that scared them as kids. While exploring this house, Kerry found a strange-looking doll with a wicked grin under the floorboards. Kerry thought it was the body of a small child at first, but on closer inspection, it was a wooden doll dressed in green with a long braid. Kerry and his brother decided to take this doll home and put it in a sack in the back seat of his car. At one point, they said that it looked like the bag was moving. The brother made a joke by shaking the bag and screaming, "Let me out," which is where the name came from. And ever since then, strange occurrences have followed this doll. It is reported that Letta the doll moves by itself, with strange scuff marks appearing on the doll's shoes and around the house. His movement has also been caught on camera. The presence of the doll itself has been known to make people sick and even faint at the sight of it. On further examination of the doll, it was confirmed that the head of hair on this doll was human. Walton took the doll to a museum where experts said that the doll could be around 200 years old, and that it was from Eastern Europe, most likely Romania. Walton also took the doll to a psychic, and the psychic said that this doll was inhabited by a young boy who died from drowning. And Kerry thinks that this is the reason why it's always raining when they go travelling. At one point, Kerry Walton did try to get rid of the doll by selling it, but said when he got to his car it was like a physical force was stopping him from getting in. Ever since then, the Let Me Out doll has become an important part of his family. Despite its frightening appearance, Walton has said that the doll has actually brought good luck to his life. Behind the walls of the Government House in Perth, Western Australia, is the tale of a dangerous love triangle and a ghostly legacy. These are the ghost stories from our own backyard, so sit down, dim the lights as I tell you about the story of the murder in the ballroom. In the early hours of the 27th of August 1925, engineer Mr. Cyril Gidley was enjoying the highlights of Perth's social scene. Cyril Gidley was attending the St. John of God ball held at the Government House in the ballroom. Mr. Gidley's ex-fiancée, Miss Audrey Jacob, was also attending the ball with her friend. During the evening, Audrey noticed Cyril in the company of another young woman. She left the ball and then returned with a loaded revolver. At around 1:30 a.m, Audrey approached Cyril and shot him right in the chest at point-blank range. Cyril fell to the floor bleeding heavily and died within minutes. Standing no more than 6 feet away and still clutching the revolver in her right hand, Audrey confessed, "I did it," and was soon taken away by the police. On the 8th of October 1925, the trial began. and despite the clear display of the public murder and Audrey's clear confession, she still pleaded not guilty. The jury also returned the verdict of not guilty as well, and this case was reported widely in newspapers throughout the country. The story that was told in the newspapers was that Cyril Gidley was a violent young man and almost deserved his fate. It was also widely believed that Cyril seduced Audrey, broke off the engagement, leaving Audrey heartbroken. And people really felt sorry for her. During the court trial, Audrey states that she went back to her apartment to end her life after seeing Cyril with another woman, but decided against it and returned back to the ball with the loaded revolver. When Audrey returned to the ball, she went up to Cyril and pleaded with him to reconsider their engagement. However, Cyril declined. Audrey claimed that she forgot she was carrying the revolver in a white handkerchief and raised her hand up to her head, and the revolver accidentally went off, killing Cyril. The jury believed this story even though no white handkerchief was found at the crime scene. The reason Audrey got away with murder was because of one key witness that disappeared from the scene as soon as it happened. This man kept his identity hidden for 46 years. The government house is now said to be haunted by the restless spirit of Mr. Cyril Gidley, who now haunts the scene of the crime, angry that his murderer never got any consequences. Footsteps have been heard around the ballroom as if someone is dancing, furniture mysteriously moves on its own, an apparition of a man smoking a cigar has also been seen. This ghost story involves the cold case murder of a 13-year-old girl from Tasmania, who is now said to haunt the road she died on. These are the ghost stories from our own backyard, so sit down, dim the lights as I tell you about the story of Chrissy Venn. On the 20th of February 1921, Chrissy Venn, who was 13 at the time, was running some errands before she went missing from the quiet country town of North Motton in Tasmania. Unfortunately, a few days later, her body was found stuffed headfirst into a tree stump. There was evidence that Chrissy put up a fight before eventually dying from asphyxiation. One of the men that was part of the search party for Chrissy was called George William King. Now, George wasn't part of the search party that had found Chrissy, but he was present when her body was removed from the stump. The locals quickly began to suspect George of murdering Chrissy due to strange injuries on his hands, which he had claimed that he had gotten them from searching for her, but later said that they could have been a result from play fighting with his wife, which I do not believe for 1 second. Rumours began to circulate that Chrissy was actually scared of George during the time she was alive, and numerous people had said that they had seen her hide from George whenever he approached. After Chrissy was found, George had also received an anonymous letter that said, "Take care, I saw you murder Chrissy Venn, and if you don't confess, I am going to tell the police." Alongside the letter was a picture of a man hanging from the gallows. On the 14th of August, George was sent to court for the murder of Chrissy Venn and the trial began. And 6 days later, the jury returned the verdict and George was found not guilty. No one was ever charged for her murder and eventually the case went cold. It is said that her spirit now haunts Allison Road in North Motton. There has been many strange tales of cars stalling on this road, people's cars being scratched, and some people have even claimed to have seen the apparition of a young girl. There is even a tradition in the area to walk out to the location of the stump at midnight and walk around it, in hopes of stirring up any activity. This iconic street in Melbourne is said to be haunted by a ghost with a violent backstory. These are the ghost stories from our own backyard, so sit down, dim the lights as I tell you about the story of Australia's Jack the Ripper. If you have ever walked down Hosier Lane and felt a pair of phantom hands slowly wrap themselves around your neck, you may have just encountered the ghost of Frederick Bailey Deeming, who was said to have been a frequent visitor of the area. Many people think that he may have been the notorious serial killer Jack the Ripper. Deeming was born in Kent, England and started a life of crime from an early age. In 1891, Deeming murdered his first wife and 4 children in which he buried them under their house. He then moved from Rainhill to Australia in the same year with his second wife, Emily. Deeming and Emily moved to the Melbourne suburb of Windsor, and Deeming had already paid a month's worth of rent in advance. He then quickly moved out at some point. During this time, poor Emily had also gone missing. People then began to complain of a horrible smell coming from the ex-residence of Deeming, and the police was called to investigate. Under the hearthstone of the fireplace and beneath some cement was the body of Emily Mathers. Post-mortem revealed that she had been attacked with an axe before having her throat cut, and by the time they found her, she had already been dead for 3 months. This led to Deeming's arrest at Southern Cross and eventually his execution at the Old Melbourne Jail in 1892. There was a crowd of around 12,000 who had come to see Deeming's last moments, and cheered when he was confirmed dead. During the trial, Deeming also confessed to the murder of his first wife and 4 children. Deeming also said he would see the ghost of his mother, who encouraged him to kill the women in his life. While in prison, it was alleged that Deeming had also confessed to the last 2 Whitechapel murders, but said that he knew nothing of Jack the Ripper's other crimes. Since then, there has been many rumours that Deeming's presence in London at the time that Jack the Ripper was at large could make him a prime suspect. People have also compared Deeming's description and the description given by those who have claimed to seen Jack the Ripper's face, and people believe that there are many similarities between the two. So next time you go down Hosier Lane to look at the art, or to take a shortcut through the city, stay alert, because you may very well encounter the spirit of Frederick Bailey Deeming. There are many haunted pubs in Australia. However, this one in Melbourne is particularly spooky. These are the ghost stories from our own backyard, so sit down, dim the lights as I tell you the story of the slit neck lady from the Young and Jackson Hotel. Sitting across from Flinders Street Station, in 1861, the Princess Bridge Hotel was established. It eventually got a name change in 1875 to the Young and Jackson when its new Irish owners took over. You may have gone to the Young and Jackson completely unaware of the spooky sighting that happens at this location. And the haunting actually occurs outside the building. There has been many reports of male patrons noticing a woman standing up against a light post outside the building. She has been described as a very beautiful and alluring young woman dressed in period-style clothing. However, on closer inspection, people say she gets more hideous the closer you get. And then she shows you her neck, with a terrifying slash across her throat. There are no theories on who this spirit is exactly, but people think she may have been one of the murdered prostitutes who worked in the Flinders area in the 19th century. Sadly, these murders were disregarded by the police. Perhaps this is her way of telling the world how she was killed, or she may still be on the lookout for her killer. This spirit was put to rest over 100 years after their death. These are the ghost stories from our own backyard, so sit down, dim the lights as I tell you the story of Ascot House. Located in Toowoomba, Ascot House was built for a wealthy businessman and politician, Frederick Holberton. Frederick bought the property in 1876 and named it Tor. During its time, it was one of the most largest and expensive residences in the area. It was large enough that it required maids and servants to look after the house. It eventually changed owners and was renamed Ascot House. After multiple owners and tenants, the house eventually fell into disrepair. It was not until the 1980s when its new owner purchased the house and was able to renovate it and bring it back to its former glory. It wasn't long until the new owner began to have some very strange experiences. During the night, she would hear ghostly footsteps walk up her hallway, and when she went to check, there was nobody there. She would also experience cold spots, furniture moving by itself, and would sometimes feel a pair of phantom hands brush past her shoulders. There has been many eyewitness accounts of apparitions occurring in the house, including one man who had claimed to seen an apparition of a young woman, except he noted that her neck was broken and that her head was bent to the side. There had been a long-standing rumour that one of the servants hung themselves in the house. After many years of researching, the new owner believes she may have found who this restless spirit might be. She thinks this spirit may be a young woman called Maggie Hume. Maggie Hume started working at Ascot House when she was 12 years old as a housemaid, under its original owner, Frederick Holberton. At 23 years of age, Maggie unalived herself, not by hanging, but by consuming poison. According to police reports, it was believed that Maggie killed herself after finding out she was pregnant in 1891, where a couple of other male staff members confessed to having connections with her. During this time, it was frowned upon to be pregnant and not married. After her death, Maggie was buried in an unmarked grave. However, she has now been put to rest with a headstone with her name on it, which has been placed at the original site, finally giving her the recognition she didn't get in life.